Hi, I'm Elizabeth. My brother mocked me for my pay stub, made me feel worthless in front of everyone. But it wasn't until the banker whispered, "Her signature froze you," that I realized the truth. My family had been lying to me for years. They stole my inheritance, sold my house, and I never saw it coming. But the worst part? It was all a setup to keep me in the dark. Now, I'm ready to fight for what's mine. How far will I go to take it back? Watch to find out. The evening began like so many others. A warm breeze drifted through the open windows of the suburban house, the faint scent of dinner wafting through the air. It was a typical Sunday gathering, the kind that happened far too often, but was always accompanied by the usual mix of forced smiles and strained laughter. I had been preparing myself for this. It was going to be another one of those nights. I sat at the far end of the dining table, hands folded in my lap, as the familiar chatter swirled around me. Lee was in his element, as always, the golden child. The successful one who had everything. The big house, the fancy car, the job that kept him comfortable. And there I was, Evelyn, the one who had to settle for the less glamorous life, the one who had worked hard just to make ends meet but never received the credit for it. I could feel the weight of it as clearly as if it were a physical burden. My shoulders ached, my jaw tightened, but I stayed silent. Lee made sure to remind us of his superiority every chance he got. His voice boomed across the table, carrying the lightness of someone who had it all, without a hint of empathy for anyone who might not have been so fortunate. "You know," he said, glancing at me with that smirk of his, "I've been looking at my bank statements lately. You should try it sometime, Ev. You might learn a thing or two about how to manage finances." I felt a lump form in my throat. The words hit me like a slap, but I held my ground. I knew better than to let him see my anger. "I'm sure you're doing just fine," I muttered, barely able to make eye contact. Lee chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my blood boil. "Just fine? I don't think you understand. It's not about doing just fine. It's about thriving." He let the word hang in the air, like a taunt. "But I guess it's hard to thrive when you're stuck in a job that barely pays the bills." I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but the words never came. Instead, I sat there, clenching my fists under the table, wishing for a way out of this suffocating moment. Lee wasn't finished, of course. He never was. "Seriously, though," he continued, the amusement evident in his voice, "you really ought to think about your future. I don't know how you expect to get ahead with your pay stub." He emphasized the words, mocking me, in front of everyone. It was as if the world around me paused. The laughter from my stepmother, Clarissa, echoed in my ears, the sound of her approval at Lee's cruelty making my skin crawl. She wasn't saying anything, but her expression said it all. She was complicit in his ridicule, smiling along with him like a proud accomplice. My heart raced, but I couldn't speak. The years of conditioning to keep the peace, to remain the dutiful daughter, the quiet one, held me back. It was all I knew. Just take it. Keep your head down. Don't cause a scene. But the humiliation burned. I wanted to shout, to say something that would make it stop. But I didn't. Instead, I let the moment pass, my stomach twisting in knots. I retreated inwardly, slowly sinking into the background. Lee and Clarissa continued their conversation, oblivious to my pain. I could feel myself shrinking in their presence, my identity dissolving into the background noise of their lives. Maybe this is just who I am, I thought, my gaze fixed on the table. The one who holds everything together but never gets anything in return. The thought echoed in my mind, like a broken record. I knew this feeling all too well. It wasn't new. It had been a part of me for as long as I could remember. The quiet frustration, the invisible weight of being the one who always gave but never received. The evening dragged on, and I continued to sit there, forcing a smile, nodding when necessary. But all I wanted was to escape, to be anywhere else but here. Then, just as the night seemed to settle into its familiar rhythm, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I glanced at it quickly, just a glance, not wanting to draw attention to myself. It was a message from my lawyer. "The documents are ready," the message read. "We can proceed with the next steps whenever you're ready." A small jolt of something warm shot through me. Hope, maybe? For the first time in a long time, it felt like I had something of my own, something that wasn't linked to my family, something that wasn't a mockery. The message was short, but its impact was anything but. It was a reminder that I had been making moves, real moves, to change my life. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling the weight of the decision I had been avoiding for so long. This wasn't just a financial matter, it was a matter of my life, my independence. But just as quickly as the hope came, it was clouded by doubt. The family, the people who had known me my whole life, they were the ones I feared disappointing the most. Could I really go through with this? Could I truly cut myself off from them? Could I walk away from everything I had known? I stood up abruptly, excusing myself from the table. I didn't want to be here anymore. Didn't want to hear their voices, their laughter. It was all too much. As I walked out of the room, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Could I do it? Could I really walk away from this? From them? The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The muffled hum of the city outside barely penetrated the walls. I sat on the couch, my phone in my hand, the lawyer's text message still glowing on the screen. "We're ready to move forward with your case. Let me know when you want to proceed." I stared at it, the words blurring in front of me. My fingers hovered above the screen as 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. I had been planning this for so long. Every step, every word, every move had been calculated. But now that it was finally here, I felt frozen. The weight of the decision was suffocating. Could I really go through with it? Could I really confront them, risk everything, and take that step away from the only life I had ever known? I put the phone down, the message still flashing in my peripheral vision. I needed to think, to process. But the more I thought about it, the more the doubt crept in. The silence in the room was oppressive, and I couldn't escape the haunting echoes of my family's voices. Lee's laughter, Clarissa's cutting remarks, and the constant underlying feeling of being invisible, unimportant. It all started to swirl together, blending into an overwhelming cacophony of resentment. Guilt gnawed at me, the weight of everything I'd been taught growing up. My mother had always told me to put family first, to sacrifice for the greater good, to swallow my pride for the sake of peace. But what had it gotten me? Endless years of being overshadowed, belittled, and dismissed. It had been drilled into me that my worth was tied to my ability to keep everything together, to be the silent one, the obedient one. But I was tired. I paced the room, trying to shake off the tension, but it lingered in my muscles, a tightness in my chest. The lawyer's message was a lifeline, a thread of hope, but also a reminder of everything I stood to lose. I'd spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, trying to be the perfect daughter, the one who always complied, always gave in, but that wasn't enough anymore. It would never be enough. A wave of anger swept over me, and with it, a new resolve. I had spent too long being a punching bag for their cruelty. It was time for me to take control. But the fear of what that would mean for my family was almost crippling. I hadn't even had a real conversation with them in years. The thought of what might happen if I confronted them, if I stood up for myself, made my stomach churn. I sat back down, my hands trembling as I stared at the phone. I had to do this. I couldn't keep living this way, stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and resentment. But how? How could I face them without losing everything? And then I thought of Lee, his smug smile, his mocking tone, the way he made me feel like nothing. His words about my job, about how I was always struggling to get by, made me sick. Why had I let him get away with it all these years? Why had I accepted his disdain without ever fighting back? I thought about the last family dinner, how he had looked down on me like I was nothing more than a joke. I had been humiliated in front of them all, and yet I had stayed silent. I hadn't stood up for myself. I had let him win, no more. I grabbed my phone again, determined to do something, anything, to take control of my life. I dialed Lee's number, my thumb pressing against the screen harder than I intended. The phone rang, each second stretching out into eternity. "Hey, Lee," I said when he finally answered, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the shakiness in it. "What's up, Ev?" he replied, his tone casual, as if he hadn't just spent hours mocking me only days ago. "I need to ask you about something," I started, my mind racing, trying to find the words. But before I could continue, he interrupted. "Let me guess," he said. his voice dripping with sarcasm. You're asking for more money? Some kind of loan to help you get your life together? I felt my blood boil, but I swallowed it down. No, it's not that. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to sound calm. I just wanted to know if you've thought about family business matters. You know, the future stuff. Like, what's gonna happen when… I get it, he interrupted again, his voice rising. You still can't figure it out, huh? You should have listened to me years ago, Ev. But instead, you chose to make poor decisions. And now look where you are, still stuck. His words hit like a punch to the gut. He was doing it again, belittling me, making me feel small. But this time was different. I wasn't going to let it slide. Not anymore. I don't need you to tell me what to do with my life, Lee, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I'm not your project. I'm not the one you can just push around anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear his surprise. He didn't know how to respond. I've had enough, I added, feeling a surge of power rise in me. I'm done being your joke, and I'm done being your punching bag. I'm moving forward with my own plans. I don't know what you're talking about, Lee finally said, his voice full of disbelief. But fine, do what you want. Don't expect me to help. I'm not asking for your help, I replied coldly. Just stay out of my way. I hung up before he could say another word. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking, but something inside me felt different. I had done it. I had stood up for myself. For the first time in years. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And it felt damn good. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The decision was made. I was going to take control of my life, no matter what it cost me. This was just the beginning. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I took this step, there would be no going back. I had made my decision. I stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, reflecting the emptiness I felt inside. My apartment was eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. I had been sitting here for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The lawyer's message still lingered in my mind. We're ready to move forward with your case. Let me know when you want to proceed. The words were simple enough, but they had the weight of 1,000 decisions behind them. What was I really ready to do? How far was I willing to go? I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to be the dutiful daughter, the one who was always there, always holding things together. But what had it gotten me? Years of being belittled, mocked, and dismissed by the people who were supposed to love me the most. My brother, Lee, always had something to say about my life, my choices, my job. And Clarissa, his wife, always there with a subtle, insidious comment, backing him up. It was exhausting. But now, for the first time, I had a choice. A real choice. I could either keep living like this small, invisible, constantly playing the role they expected of me, or I could take control and make a change. I picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer's number. When she answered, I didn't waste time. Let's move forward, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. I'm ready. Her voice was warm with encouragement. You're sure? I'm sure. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then she said, Okay, I'll start the paperwork and get everything moving. The finality of her words hit me harder than I expected. This was really happening. For years, I had felt trapped in the cycle of family expectations, too afraid to break free. But now, the chains were starting to break, and with each passing second, I could feel my resolve strengthening. I hung up and stared at the screen for a moment, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. I was really doing this. I was taking the first step toward freedom. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about this was going to be easy. And the hardest part was yet to come. As I stood there, the phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from Lee. You don't have the guts to follow through. You'll never make it without me. I stared at the screen, the anger rising in my chest. His words stung, as they always did. But this time, something was different. I didn't feel the usual sinking sensation of shame and self-doubt. Instead, I felt a fire burning inside me. He didn't get to define me anymore. He didn't get to control me. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed out a reply. Watch me. The words felt like a declaration, a promise to myself. I was no longer the person I used to be, the one who silently accepted the hurt and humiliation. I was done being his joke. But I knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The moment I took that step, everything would change. I would lose my family's approval, and maybe even their love. But at least I would finally have my own. I walked to the kitchen and started making a cup of tea, my hands still shaky. I had always thought I would never get here, that I would never have the strength to do what needed to be done. But now, as I stared at the steaming mug in my hands, I realized I had been underestimating myself all along. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. As I sipped the tea, my thoughts drifted back to the conversation with Lee, his arrogance, his assumption that I would always bend to his will. He was wrong. I wasn't going to let him control me anymore. But then there was Clarissa. I couldn't forget how she had subtly undermined me, with her little comments and knowing smiles. She had always been in Lee's corner, and she had made it clear where her loyalties lay. But I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into staying in this toxic environment. I wasn't going to be anyone's victim anymore. The next few days passed in a blur. The lawyer's team worked on the paperwork, and I focused on getting everything in order on my end. But even as I prepared for the changes to come, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach. What would happen when my family found out? How would they react? Then, one evening, Clarissa called. I knew it was coming. I hadn't heard from her directly in a while, and I wasn't surprised when her number flashed across my screen. I answered with a sigh, steeling myself for what was to come. "Evelyn," she began, her voice sickly sweet. "I just wanted to check in on you. I know things have been tense, but you're still part of the family, and we want what's best for you." I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to soften me up, make me second-guess myself. She was so good at it, but this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my tone even. "I've made my decision." There was a pause on the other end. I could practically hear her calculating her next words. "Are you sure this is what you really want? I know Lee can be hard on you, but he only wants the best for you. You don't have to do this, Evelyn." Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let her manipulate me. "I've thought it through. I'm doing what's best for me." She sighed, clearly frustrated, but I could hear the edge in her voice now. "Well, don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't," I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. As I set the phone down, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. Just as I was starting to process everything, my phone buzzed again. I looked down, and it was a message from Lee. "You'll regret this. Don't say I didn't warn you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let them sink in. Instead, I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I didn't reply to Lee's message, I thought to myself. Taking a deep breath and walking out the door, my new life was waiting on the other side. I was in the thick of it now. Sitting alone in my apartment, papers spread out across the table, my fingers traced the edges of the legal documents that would mark the beginning of everything I had been afraid to do for years. The reality of it all was starting to settle in. There was no turning back. The apartment felt different now. The silence seemed to press in on me, louder than the constant noise of my family's judgments. But now, I wasn't the passive one. No, I was the one taking action. The one who would finally do something about all the years of disrespect and manipulation. My phone buzzed. It was Anne, my lawyer. "I have the documents ready," she said when I picked up. "You're all set to make this official." I felt a tightness in my chest, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, something stronger. Resolve. I nodded to myself, even though I was alone. Send them over. With the documents in hand, I felt like I was holding a key to a new life. Sure, there was still a part of me that wanted to back out, maybe even more than one part, but I knew what was at stake now. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for myself, for my own dignity, something I had lost a long time ago. I wasn't going to let that happen again. I signed the papers with a steady hand, and with each stroke, the weight that had been holding me down for so long began to lift. As the last signature was placed, I almost felt like I could breathe again. This was it. This was my first real step toward freedom. But it was quickly followed by a harsh reality. The moment I left the lawyer's office, my phone vibrated with an email from Lee. I already knew what it would say before I even opened it. "You don't have the guts to follow through," it read. "If you go down this path, I'll expose every flaw, every weakness. You think this will make you stronger? It won't. You'll regret it." My stomach churned. That familiar feeling of dread crept up, like it always did when Lee threatened me. It was his way of holding me hostage emotionally, making sure I never stepped out of line. But something was different now. The fear didn't have the same grip on me. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Maybe it was the fact that I had already taken the first step. Or maybe it was just the sheer exhaustion from always letting him win. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to let this scare me. Not this time. I called Anne. "Move forward," I said. "Don't let them stop us." Anne's voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Got it, Evelyn. We're moving forward." I hung up, but before I could even take a moment to collect myself, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Clarissa. I knew this was coming, too. "I know you're upset, Evelyn, but you've got to understand. Lee's just frustrated. He's not really angry with you. He just wants you to succeed. We all do, you know?" I read the message with a sense of disgust. Clarissa always had a way of making things sound so reasonable, so caring. But I knew better now. She was just another piece of the manipulation. Another way to keep me tethered to this toxic family dynamic. I didn't respond. Instead, I locked my phone and set it down on the table. They thought they could keep me down forever, but they were wrong. I wasn't the same person anymore. The weight of everything was starting to set in. The consequences. The possibility of losing my family. My connection to them had been fraying for a while now, but it was still a scary thought. My father's voice echoed in my mind. He hadn't called in years, but that didn't make it any easier. He had always been there for Lee. I knew how he felt about me taking this step. As I was lost in thought, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Clarissa or Lee. It was my father. His name flashed on the screen, and I almost hesitated before answering. "Evelyn," he said in his usual calm tone, "we need to talk." I could feel the weight of his words even before he spoke them. "About what?" I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. His tone shifted, just slightly. "About what you're doing. You're making a mistake." I took a deep breath. "I don't think I am. I've made my decision." There was a long pause on the other end. It felt like he was searching for the right words, but nothing came. Finally, he spoke again. "I just want you to know, whatever you do, you can't come back from it." His words hit me like a slap. I swallowed hard, trying not to let him see how much they affected me. "I'll be fine," I said, but even I didn't believe it. The finality of his tone rang in my ears long after the conversation ended. Was this a warning, a threat, or simply a goodbye? Either way, it didn't matter. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back now. I stood up from the table, my legs a little shaky. I had a meeting with Anne to finalize everything, and I knew that from here on out, things would never be the same. But for the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I was ready. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I took this step, there would be no going back. I had made my decision. The tension in the air felt different today. It wasn't just the weight of the decisions I had made or the anxiety about what lay ahead. It was the anticipation, the feeling that something was about to break, and it was only a matter of time before it happened. I had spent days in my apartment, poring over every document I could find, every piece of evidence that would help me fight back. The quiet, empty space felt more suffocating than ever as I carefully planned my next move. This was my moment. I picked up my phone and saw the new message from Anne. "Ready when you are." For the first time in a long while, I felt a surge of power rush through me. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. I had already taken the first steps, and now it was time to finish what I had started. The silence in my apartment was broken by the ringing of my phone. It was a message from my lawyer's office. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat as I read the words that would change everything. There, in front of me, was a document I hadn't expected. A will, my father's will. Or, rather, a hidden clause within it. The implications were massive. My father had been protecting Lee for years, and now, I had proof. My hands trembled slightly as I read through the details. A clause that would guarantee Lee full control of certain family assets, keeping me out of the loop permanently. I had never seen it before. It was a calculated move, my father's way of ensuring I would never challenge Lee's position. And now, it was the very thing that would allow me to take control back. Unbelievable, I whispered to myself. The anger swelled inside me. But it wasn't just anger at Lee or Clarissa. It was anger at myself for not seeing this sooner. How long had I been blind to the reality of my father's intentions? How many times had I allowed myself to be manipulated, thinking it was for the greater good of the family? I stood up, the weight of the discovery sinking in. This was bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just about legal paperwork anymore. It was about years of deceit, years of manipulation that I had allowed to happen. But now, I had the power to change it. I took a deep breath and sat back down at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could feel the fury building, but I also felt a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I had the power to control the narrative. I called Lee. My hands gripped the phone tightly as it rang, my heart beating in my chest. He picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's going on now?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady. But underneath it, I could feel the heat of the confrontation bubbling up. "I'm coming over." "You've got to be kidding me. What do you think you're going to do? Challenge me again?" He laughed mockingly. "You really think you can win this fight?" His laughter made my stomach churn, but I pushed it down. I was done being afraid. "I'm not here to fight, Lee. I'm here to end this once and for all. I'm coming to see you, and this time, you won't be able to ignore me." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the realization that I was finally taking control of my life. I wasn't going to let him or anyone else push me around anymore. The confrontation with Lee had been inevitable. He had been playing the part of the big brother, the protector, for too long. But now, I could see through it all. He wasn't protecting me. He was keeping me in a cage, just like my father had done. He wanted me to stay small, to stay quiet, to stay in my place. I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, my heart racing as I made my way to the meeting spot. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew this was a turning point. No more pretending. No more playing the victim. When I arrived at the location, Lee was already there, leaning against his car, his arms crossed. His smirk when he saw me only fueled my determination. "You really think you can make me feel guilty?" he scoffed. "You're out of your depth, Evelyn." I held my ground, walking straight toward him. "No, Lee. You're the one who's out of your depth now." I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal documents. I threw them onto the hood of his car, making him flinch. "This is real. This isn't some game. I've had enough of living under your shadow. I'm done letting you control my life. You can't keep me in your little box anymore. I'm not scared of you anymore." His face twisted in anger, but I didn't flinch. I could see the panic creeping in behind his eyes. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself. "You think this is going to change anything? You're nothing without us, Evelyn. Without me," he hissed. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked away. But just as I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was from my father. The tone of his message was colder than I had ever heard it. "This is the last time I'll speak to you like this. You've made your choice." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, the man who had always been the pillar of my life, was turning his back on me. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Lee had ever done. As I stood there in the parking lot, the weight of the decision I had made settled in. This was the moment everything changed. There was no going back now. I felt the coldness creep through me as his words echoed in my head. Was this his final decision or mine? I stood at my apartment window, staring out at the skyline of the city, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The past few days had been a whirlwind of decisions, emotions, and realizations. I had spent countless hours preparing, gathering evidence, and mentally preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. I was no longer the quiet daughter, no longer the one who sat back, letting life happen to her. I was ready to take control of my own story. It felt like a storm was brewing. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, an uneasy mix of dread and excitement. I was about to face everything I'd been avoiding for years, the manipulation, the lies, the control my family had held over me for far too long. And yet, as I stood there, something deep inside me had shifted. I was done hiding. The sound of my phone vibrating on the counter snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Anne, my lawyer. "Evelyn," she said when I picked up, "I need to talk to you about something urgent." I braced myself. I knew what was coming. "We've just received word from your family's lawyer," Anne continued, her tone serious. "They might already be aware of the documents you found, and they're preparing to fight back." This just got a lot more complicated. A cold chill ran through me. I had suspected this might happen, but hearing it out loud made it real. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, the consequences of my actions rushing toward me faster than I was ready for. But in the back of my mind, something snapped. I wasn't going to retreat. Not now. "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "I'm moving forward." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Anne spoke again. "I understand, Evelyn. We'll prepare for everything, but just be aware, it's going to be a fight. You need to be prepared." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I had made up my mind. I was past the point of no return. "I'm ready," I replied. After hanging up, I sat down at my desk and reviewed the evidence once more. The will, the documents, the emails. I felt a surge of determination, the anger I had been holding inside, fueling my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything I had been forced to swallow for years. I glanced at the clock. It was time. I pulled out my phone and arranged a meeting with my family. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew it wouldn't be. But I wasn't the scared, passive person I once was. I wasn't going to sit in the background any longer. I was going to make them listen. The next day, I walked into the meeting room with my head held high. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the woman who had discovered the truth, and I wasn't going to let anyone push me back into the shadows. Lee was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table, looking as smug as ever. Clarissa sat beside him, her fake concern written all over her face. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in, their judgment heavy in the air. "Evelyn!" Lee greeted me, a mocking smile on his face. "I wasn't expecting you to show up. What's this about?" I set the stack of documents down on the table, the sound of paper hitting the surface, cutting through the tension in the room. "This is about you and Dad, and everything you've been hiding." Lee raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, my voice steady but full of anger. "The will. The clause that keeps me out of the family's business dealings. The lies you've been telling me my entire life." His smile faltered, and I could see the panic in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation, Evelyn," Clarissa said, trying to smooth things over. "Maybe you're just overreacting." I didn't back down. "I'm not overreacting, Clarissa. This is real. I have proof." The room grew quiet as I laid out the evidence, one document at a time. Lee's face turned pale, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're making a big mistake, Evelyn," Lee said, his voice low. "This isn't the way to handle things." I was done listening to him. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. "No, I'm done being manipulated by you. I've been your punching bag for too long, and I'm not going to be that person anymore." His face twisted in anger, but I didn't flinch. "You can't just walk away from this. You don't understand what you're doing." I shook my head. "No, Lee, you don't understand. You never did." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the frustration building in Lee's eyes as he tried to regain control of the situation. But I wasn't done. "I'm not invisible anymore," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And I'm not backing down." The door to the meeting room opened, and my father stepped in, his expression unreadable. He looked at me, then at the documents on the table, before speaking. "Evelyn, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this needs to stop. You're threatening the family." His cold words hit me like a slap in the face. I had always looked up to him, always believed he had my best interests at heart. But now, as he stood there, the weight of his betrayal crushed me. "You've crossed a line, Evelyn," he said, his voice distant. "You've made your choice." The finality in his words hit me harder than anything else. The man who had always been my pillar of support was now the one who had pushed me away. My heart sank as I realized the truth. He had never truly been on my side. As the door clicked shut behind him, I stared at the documents on the table. I had made my choice, and there was no going back now. I sat in my apartment, the weight of the upcoming meeting pressing on my chest like an iron bar. The last few days had been a blur of emotions, decisions, and quiet moments of reckoning. I had prepared myself for this day, mentally, emotionally, and legally. But now, as the hour drew near, all I could think about was the truth. This was the point of no return. I couldn't hide anymore. "Are you ready?" Anne's voice broke through my thoughts, calm and steady. She was the one constant throughout this entire ordeal. The one person who had believed in me when no one else did. "I have to be," I replied, my voice tight, almost unrecognizable. I had to keep it together. But the anger and fear swirling inside me were hard to suppress. This was my family, my flesh and blood, and yet it felt like I was preparing for war. I had tried to stay out of their battles for so long, but this time they had crossed a line. I stood up, my hands shaking as I gathered the documents, the same papers I'd spent hours reviewing. The will, the contracts, the emails, everything that proved how much they'd manipulated me. This wasn't just about money or control, it was about dignity, my dignity. The respect they had stolen from me for years. As I grabbed my jacket, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Anne. "Be careful. There may be someone else at the meeting. They might be setting you up to discredit everything you say." My heart sank. I had expected the lies, but not this, someone else to be planted there to manipulate the truth. My family never did anything without a hidden agenda. I could feel the bile rise in my throat, but I pushed it down. This was it. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me again. "I'm not afraid of them anymore," I whispered to myself. "Let's do this." I left my apartment with one last look at the place that had once felt like a safe haven, but now seemed like the last bit of comfort I had to leave behind. As I walked to the car, I knew nothing would be the same after today. When I arrived at the meeting spot, a neutral location that my father had insisted on, I was met with a tense silence. The room felt suffocating, but I stepped in with my head held high. Lee was already sitting at the table, his typical smug expression on display. Clarissa, as always, was sitting beside him, her eyes narrowed, calculating. I didn't waste time. I opened my bag, pulling out the stack of documents that had cost me so much to collect. The silence in the room deepened as I began to lay them on the table, one by one. "Enough games," I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. "You've lied to me for years. It's over," Lee scoffed, his eyes flicking over the papers. "Is that what this is about? Your little documents?" he mocked. "You think a few papers are going to change anything?" I looked him square in the eye, refusing to back down. "It's not just the papers, Lee. It's the truth. The lies you've been telling me. The manipulation. I've had enough." Clarissa opened her mouth to speak, but I silenced her with a single look. This wasn't her fight. This was mine. Lee shifted uncomfortably, but tried to hold on to his composure. "You're being irrational, Evelyn," he said, his voice low and dismissive. "This is a family matter. You're blowing things way out of proportion." "You've always said that," I snapped. "Always dismissed me. But not anymore." My fingers curled around the papers as I spoke, the evidence I held now, my weapon, my voice unwavering. "Don't act like you care about family, Lee. You've been using me, using all of us, and now it's over. You can't control me anymore." The room was still. Lee's face hardened, but it was clear I had struck a nerve. For once, I saw the cracks in his carefully crafted persona. His confidence wavered for just a second, but it was my father's voice that cut through the silence. His cold words felt like ice being poured over me. "You're destroying the family, Evelyn," he said, his voice as flat as ever. "You think this is about truth and honesty? It's not. It's about loyalty. And you've failed us." The words hit harder than anything Lee had said. For years, my father had been the one constant in my life, the one person I thought I could rely on. But now, hearing him say those words, I realized how wrong I had been. He had always put Lee first. I had always been second, or worse, invisible. "You don't get it," I said, my voice breaking but full of resolve. "You've never supported me. You've only ever used me to keep your little empire intact. But I'm done. My heart pounded, and I could feel the anger and betrayal burning inside me. Every moment of my life, every sacrifice I had made for them, this was it. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I stood up, the room still cold with tension. I'm not going to play by your rules. Not anymore. I've crossed the line, and I'm not coming back. Just as I turned to leave, Clarissa's voice cut through the air, sharp and unexpected. There's something we've been keeping from you. I froze, my heart racing. What now? Had they been planning something else all along? Your father never wanted you to find out, she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that sent a shiver down my spine. The words hit like a physical blow. I stood there, unable to move, as everything I thought I knew about my family unraveled before me. What else had they hidden from me? I turned back to face them, my eyes narrowing in disbelief. What else? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. And that's when everything I had thought I knew about my family crumbled, and I realized I was more alone than I'd ever been. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with tension. I could almost hear the weight of every decision I had made, each one leading me to this final moment. My heart was pounding in my chest, my palms sweating, but I wasn't about to back down. This was it. Sitting across from my father and stepmother, the weight of everything I had been through in this twisted family bore down on me. The years of manipulation, the subtle control, and the betrayal, it was all coming to a head now. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about my life, my dignity, my future. I had fought for too long to stay silent, to be the person they wanted me to be, but I wasn't her anymore. I was done. Are we really going to pretend like nothing happened? I asked, my voice cold, but steady. My father didn't answer right away. He was always so careful, always calculating. I had always been the one who waited for him to speak, to tell me what I should do, but not today. Today, I was the one in control. Anne's words echoed in my mind. You know what they're capable of, Elizabeth. They've stacked the deck against you, but you've got the truth on your side. Don't let them intimidate you. I took a deep breath. I know what you did. I know what you've been hiding, and it's time for it all to come out. My father shifted in his seat, his face hardening. You don't understand, Elizabeth. This is for the good of the family, he said, his voice defensive. The words burned. How could he still try to justify this after everything? The years of quietly watching me fight for his approval, the times I had begged him to see me, to see my worth. And this was his response? No, I replied firmly. This was never about family. This was always about control. And you never wanted me to succeed. He flinched, but only for a moment. My father's eyes narrowed, calculating. You've always been a disappointment, he said coldly. Your actions are tearing this family apart. I felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't the hot-headed, uncontrolled rage I used to feel. This was different. This was quiet, purposeful. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. He had never wanted me to succeed. He had always feared me surpassing him, taking what was his. I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. How could you? The question slipped out before I could stop it. How could you treat me like this? For what? For a title? For money? His silence spoke volumes. My father wasn't ashamed. He was defensive. And that was when I knew. I had nothing left to lose. Everything you've done, all these years, I said, my voice rising with every word. It was never about me, was it? It was never about loving your own daughter. It was always about fear. Fear that I might be better, stronger, more capable than you. He didn't speak, and I didn't care. I'm done, I said, standing up and slamming the papers down on the table. The sound echoed in the room like a final warning shot. You won't control me anymore. I'm taking what's mine. For a moment, the room was silent. My father looked at me, his eyes cold and calculating, but now I could see it. Fear. Fear of losing the power he had held for so long. But then, Clarissa, as always, was there to protect him. You were never meant to inherit anything, Elizabeth, she said, her voice cold and cutting. Your father had planned to cut you out from the start. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I had heard it all, but this? This was the deepest cut. I had never been part of his plan, never truly been his daughter in his eyes. He had been setting me up to fail the entire time. Lies, I spat. my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. But I wasn't going to let them break me. Not now. Not after everything I had endured. I reached into my bag and pulled out the documents, the inheritance papers, the proof I had gathered, everything I needed to show that I had been right all along. I slammed them down on the table, my fingers trembling, but my resolve firm. "This is mine," I said, my voice unwavering. "I've earned this. I don't need your approval anymore. You can't take it from me." My father's expression shifted for the first time. For a moment, I saw something resembling regret in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "You think this is what you want? You're tearing the family apart for some petty claim?" His voice rose, and I knew he was losing control. "This is not about petty claims. This is about respect. Something you've never given me," I shot back. The silence that followed was deafening, but I knew I had won. At least for now. Then, just as I thought I had gained the upper hand, my father's lawyer entered the room, holding a new stack of papers. The air in the room grew even heavier as the lawyer looked at me with a grim expression. "There's a clause in the will," he said, his voice low. "A clause you weren't aware of." My stomach dropped. No. This wasn't over. "What clause?" I demanded, the words coming out of my mouth like a challenge. The lawyer didn't answer immediately, but I could see the slight smirk on his face. He wasn't on my side. "What is it?" I pressed. He finally spoke the words that would change everything. "There's a clause in the will that could discredit your entire claim." The world seemed to stop. Everything I had fought for, everything I had worked for, could all come crashing down with this one revelation. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow through the windows of my apartment, but I felt no comfort from it. The room had never felt colder, more like a battleground than a home. I was staring at the documents in front of me, every word, every clause, a reminder of how far I'd come, how much I'd fought for this moment. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my legacy, my dignity, my power. I took a deep breath, my chest tight with the weight of everything that had led me here. My father's betrayal, my stepmother's complicity, and the constant manipulation that had defined my life. But I was done. No more fear, no more pretending. It was time to face them. Time to take back what was mine. The doorbell rang. It was time. I stood up, smoothing my hands down my skirt, and took one last glance at the apartment that had always been my safe space. It wasn't a safe space anymore. It was a battlefield, and I was ready for war. The meeting was set. It felt strange to walk into a room where the people who were supposed to protect me had instead tried to tear me apart. My father sat at the head of the table, his face as cold and calculated as always. Next to him, my stepmother was a silent presence, her eyes never leaving me. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I didn't back down. "You know why we're here," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. My father looked at me, his gaze piercing. He was trying to maintain control, but I could see the cracks in his facade. For the first time, I didn't feel small in front of him. "You've always been a disappointment, Elizabeth," he said, his voice flat. "You've never understood what it takes to preserve this family's legacy." His words, meant to wound, fell flat. They didn't have the power they once did. "No, Father," I replied, standing tall. "You've never understood what it takes to let your children live their own lives." I slammed the papers down on the table, the sound echoing in the silence. The inheritance documents, the proof of everything I had been fighting for, were now in front of him. "This is mine," I said firmly. "It's my right. You can't take it from me anymore." His eyes darkened. "You think this is about the inheritance? It's about control, Elizabeth. You've always been too weak to see that." The sting of his words was sharp, but it no longer hurt. I had nothing left to lose. "Maybe," I said coldly, "but not anymore." Just when I thought I had won, when I thought the truth was finally coming to light, the lawyer entered the room, holding a new set of papers. My heart sank as he spoke. "There's a clause in the will," he said, his voice calm, but the words hit me like a ton of bricks. "A clause that could discredit your claim." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had thought I had everything, but now it felt like the rug was being pulled out from under me once again. "No," I said, shaking my head. Show me this clause." The lawyer handed over the papers, and I skimmed through them. It was a legal loophole, a technicality that could strip away everything I had fought for. My father had known this would happen. He had planned for it. I could feel the panic rising inside me, but I refused to let it take control. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. I turned to my father, my eyes cold. "Did you know about this?" He didn't answer, but his expression said everything. He had known all along. This had been part of his plan from the start. And then, in that moment, he said the words that shattered everything. "You were never meant to inherit anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was never going to let you have it." The betrayal stung deeper than anything before. Everything I had done, everything I had believed, had been a lie. My father had never seen me as his daughter. I had been nothing more than an obstacle to him. "You've always been a disappointment," he repeated, his words cutting through the air. "I never wanted you to succeed." I felt the fury inside me rise to a boiling point. How could he say that? How could he do this to me? But as the anger burned within me, something else emerged: empowerment. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for myself, for the woman I had become, for the dignity I had earned. "You may have rigged everything," I said, my voice icy with determination. "But I'm still standing here, and I'm not backing down." Then, as if it couldn't get worse, my stepmother leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "Your father made sure you would never get a dime. He's always been in control. You were never going to get anything." Her words were like a punch to the gut, but they only fueled my resolve. They had always kept me in the dark, always made sure I knew my place. But I wasn't their pawn anymore. I slammed my hand on the table. "I'm taking what's mine," I said, my voice steady and strong. The silence that followed was thick with tension, but this time, I was in control. I had the truth on my side. And just when I thought it was over, when I thought I had won, my father's lawyer dropped the bombshell. "There's one more thing," he said, his eyes gleaming with a satisfaction that made my stomach churn. "A clause in the will." My heart skipped a beat. The last test, the final obstacle. But I was done being afraid. "What is it?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. The lawyer's grin widened. "There's a clause that could discredit your entire claim." The room fell silent, and I felt a cold wave wash over me. What now?